Awesome. What is going on, guys? And as you can tell by the music, we are working on Thundercat in this video today. Now, there is a lot of things that need done on this bike yet. We still have to get the bike to idle. In the last video we did get it to start, however the bike did not stay running. Once we took it off the choke, it wouldn't idle, so it's something we have to address. One other thing about this bike is the reason why I got it and was able to purchase it from the previous owner is it had an issue where it would not go over 70 miles per hour. So being that there's a track day coming up, it's definitely something I have to address and fix, because I suspect the reason it won't idle is because there's some dirt in the carburetors. Even though we did drain the carbs, it sat for that length of time, and I think there was just old gas, old residual gas sitting in there. So I am going to pull the carburetors off. That's one of the first things I'm going to do, but we have a long list of things to do. And so as you guys can see, we have quite a few things that we have to do to this bike, and it's in less than a week's time that we have to get this all done. So first thing on the list is definitely get those carbs running to where the bike idles and accepts throttle at lower RPMs. As I said, we do have an issue where the bike won't go over 70. I think I fixed that issue, but I'm not 100% sure. So that's something we're going to find out in another video, but this video is all about getting this bike running. Now, to gain access to the carburetors, we'll have access to a lot of other things. The spark plugs will be easier to get to. The valve cover will be able to access easier. So I'm going to check the valves. I'm going to pull the carburetors off. We're going to put spark plugs in. I have quite a few here. The boxes are mangled, but they're all the right plug for the bike, and I'll just use the best of the bunch. I do have some eBay levers. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below about eBay levers. Yes, no, like them, don't like them. Some of the potential issues you could run into. Let me know what you guys think. That's all the stuff that we're going to try and get done in this video. I don't know if I'll be able to get all of it done. It is laid out, and if I get too tired, then probably just call it a night. So hopefully I can work fast, get this stuff figured out. We can have this bike running before I call it a night. One thing, keep in mind when you take these carburetors off, if you look down in there, you guys can see all the way into the engine there. See the backs of the valves. So I always take a rag, just cover that up. You don't want any screws, dirt, or otherwise falling in there and causing all kinds of havoc to the engine. And before we start taking the carburetors apart, I know there's a bunch of fuel in the carburetors themselves, so we're going to drain all that fuel out now. That way we don't have to make a mess everywhere. I'm just going to drain all that fuel out of each carburetor, and then it'll be far less messy when we actually go to take it apart. Carburetors are just messy. That's really why I don't like working on carburetor stuff. It's dirty, you get gas everywhere, stinky. There's a lot of parts. But I'm going to take these apart and I'll kind of show you what's going on, and we'll see what's actually wrong with these carbs. Alright guys, so I figured out a good stopping point here. I took the carburetor float bowl assembly apart. This here is what is called the float bowl. Basically, this is what houses the float, and it is shaped like a bowl, so it's aptly named a float bowl. Alright, and these don't look horrible. I mean, there's a little bit of buildup in there, some residual crud that will just clean out. But it doesn't look horrible at all. And if we actually look inside the carburetors themselves, we can kind of go over the carburetor and give you kind of a little breakdown of how the carburetor's set up and what the key things are and what main things actually go wrong with these carburetors, especially when they're sitting for a while. Fuel enters through here. This is where the float needle rests, and that is this part right here. This float needle right here rests over this little brass fitting here, and if you look inside, I don't know if you could see that in there, but there's just a little hole in there, and this little needle plugs that hole up. As fuel fills into this float bowl here, this float here is just full of air. So as fuel comes into this float bowl, this rises up, and as this rises up, it just pushes this needle into the hole there where the fuel flows through, and when it gets to a certain level, this stops the fuel from flowing into the carburetor. Now, one of the things that goes bad on these is fuel gets in around where it pivots here, fuel gets in around this float valve, and either sticks this open, and basically open is down just like it is here, or it sticks this shut, and that either prevents fuel from coming into the carburetor, or too much fuel gets into the carburetor because it doesn't actually seal back up when it reaches that certain level because it's stuck in whatever position it is in. So that is a common issue I find with carburation. Another very common issue is down in this little area here is the slow speed jet, and then up top here would be where the main jet would go. And when I say slow speed, that's this little guy here. This is what regulates the fuel flow at idle and just off idle. And then when I say the main jet, that's this guy right here. And this is everything from beyond half throttle to full throttle. That's where the fuel flows through from the float bowl side to control and regulate the fuel flow at high RPM or wide open throttle. Now, a lot of times this doesn't clog because inside there it's a pretty big orifice, it's a pretty big hole, so usually these do not get clogged. However, the slow speed circuit tends to get clogged quite often because it is a smaller hole. It's not regulating or metering that much fuel at idle, so it is a small hole, and because of that it does get clogged. That's what I actually think went wrong with these. Some fuel got into this slow speed jet, and just through sitting 2 years or more, it just got clogged up to the point where it wouldn't idle anymore. So simple fix for this, we're just going to take these jets and we are going to put them in some cleaner. We'll let those sit for, I don't know, about maybe 20 minutes, and we'll clean those out. We'll also put the other jets in there. We'll get just other parts, screws, dirty screws. We'll put the float bowls in there and get all that stuff cleaned up so that way we can have a nice clean float bowl chamber when we put it all back together. And that's what I think's wrong with these carburetors. So we're just going to dip this stuff in the cleaner, and hopefully that takes care of our problem. Alright, so we have everything out of the acid or the carburetor cleaner. And now we just want to make sure that these jets flow well. Now what you could do with these main jets is just take some brake clean or carburetor cleaner and just spray through, make sure that sprays through. We know that that's free and clear. I'm going to show you a pretty cool trick that you can do with the slow speed. Now the slow speed jet, you can't quite fit these straws in there as they are, so I'm going to show you a way that you can actually do that. Is take a pair of vice grips and a lighter and the straw here. We can clip the straw in there at the very bottom. We can then hold the very top, and you can actually get a pair of pliers to hold the top. That way you don't burn your fingers. So just gently hold on to the top of the straw, and then take your lighter and you want to heat up this straw. You don't want to get it too hot. Hold it near the table here. And when that gets warm, the weight of that will pull that straw down. So we'll just get that warm. Once that starts to stretch, just like that. Let that cool down for a second. It doesn't take long. Grab a razor blade and we'll just make a slice on our hose. And all that did is just shrank our tube down, and now we can gain access to the smaller jet by doing so. So now we can use our little adjusted tube there, and that fits in there nicely now. And we can spray through there and make sure that it sprays out the other end. And as long as it does, that means you've got a decent amount of fuel flow through there, and that should work, and this bike should idle now that I can spray through that jet the whole way. It's going to do that to the rest of them, but cool little trick there. Alright guys, so we're in here now. Before we get the carburetors and everything back on, I'm going to take spark plugs out, pull valve cover off. I have access to the valve cover. All I did was just pulled off this little cover here that has the coils on it. So just pulled that off. All the wires are labeled, so I'm not too worried about that. We'll be able to get that stuff reattached without too much of an issue. But we're going to take spark plugs out. Now, one thing you want to do before you remove the spark plugs is take some compressed air and blow out the area where the spark plugs are, down in the spark plug galleys. I did that on this so that I had a nice clean area in there. And you just want to do that because you don't want dirt getting in there while you're removing these spark plugs. You just want to prevent any type of foreign material from getting down into the cylinders. So we're going to remove the plugs. We're going to see what they look like. We're going to reinstall the plugs, and then we're going to actually remove the valve cover and check the valve clearances and see where we're at, see if the valves are good. My prediction is the valves are going to be fine. This bike only has 15,000 miles on it, so I don't think we're going to have an issue with valves being out of adjustment. But take the spark plugs out now, and we'll see what they look like. Alright, so we got the spark plugs out, and it's not uncommon. The two outer spark plugs have a little bit of moisture. They got a little bit of moisture on them there. They're rusty. As long as the rust is on the outside, I don't care. If there's rust here, that's when I get worried, but they look clean, so they weren't running rich. They look like they were running. They just probably weren't getting fuel at idle. But each plug looks about the same, roughly. So we do have the correct plug, the CR9E. This is what the book calls for, so it had the correct plugs in it. But we did remove them. We have spark plugs to replace them. I found the 4 best out of the bunch. I already gapped them, so they are set. But the plugs didn't look horrible, so that is promising. There's nothing weird on them, no extra carbon buildup, so I think this engine should be pretty tight yet. And we're just going to throw those plugs in. Then we're going to go off and check the valves. Alright guys, now we came to the point where we're going to check the valve adjustment. I'm going to make valve adjusting simplified. I try to not overcomplicate it, but I'll show you how I check valves, and you guys can do it however you like to, but I'll just put it out there. I'll show you what I do. It's always worked for me, and I've never had an issue doing it this way. Now on this bike, there really isn't any point that I saw to rotate the engine over. So the way we can get the engine to rotate is by jacking up the rear wheel so it's off the ground and able to spin. We'll pop it into a high gear, something like, I don't know, somewhere there will work. And then when we rotate the wheel forward, that will spin the engine around, and we can check the valves at the spot to actually check them. Get a piece of paper so I can log all my valve specifications down as I am taking them. I don't work in any type of it's organized chaos, I call it. I lost my marker again. Alright, so you take marker, exhaust, that's on the front here. The intake is on the back here, so I have that laid out this way, exhaust facing forward, and then I just call this 1, 2, 3, and 4. It doesn't matter if this is cylinder 1 or that is cylinder 1, as long as when you're writing it down, whatever you call number 4 is what you're actually checking and labeling as number 4. So that's how I get it set up. I then look up the valve specifications, and this is in thousandths of an inch, so between 8 to 12 thousandths of an inch is what the valve range is for the exhaust side, and between 4 thousandths and 8 thousandths is what the range on the intake valve specification side is. As long as it's between 4 and 8, that means that valve is within tolerance and does not need to be adjusted. And the same goes with the exhaust. As long as it's within this range, you don't have to worry about removing the camshaft and adjusting your valves at that point. Now to simplify it, the way I check valves is if you look here and you see, we call this the pointy side of the cam. This is the cam lobe. That is the technical term for it. It's the raised part that actually opens and closes the valves. Now there is the highest point on the cam, which is the cam lobe. That's the highest point there, and 180 degrees from that is what's called the base circle of the cam, or the lowest point. That's where you're going to find your valve clearance. Alright, so all you need to do to simplify this is just rotate the engine until you see the pointy part of the cam lobe, or the pointy part of the cam up in the air, and then you just want to take your feeler gauge, just pick a size, since since this is the intake, we're just going to pick a size to start with that's between 8 thousandths and 4 thousandths, and I'm just going to use this 5 thousandths feeler gauge here. I'm just going to put the feeler gauge between, there between the cam base center and the actual valve bucket. I don't know if you guys can see down in there, but that's all I'm doing. I'm just inserting that feeler gauge in there, and it should go in and slide out without too much resistance, and the same with the other side. Alright, so 5 thousandths fits. We then go up to the next size, which is a 6 thousandths feeler gauge, still within spec. We see if that fits, and it does. It does on the one side, and it does not fit on the other side. So since it does not fit on the other side, come back here. We're working on the third cylinder on my paper here, on the intake, and we just put 0.005 on the one side, and then we still have to find out what the other side will be. So 6 fit, then take the 8 thousandths feeler gauge, and we'll see if that goes in. And if that doesn't go in, then we can call that between 6 and 7 thousandths, which is within the spec, and we will write that down there, that was, we'll just call that 6, but that's within the spec. I could put a 7 thousandths feeler gauge in there, but there is no point because the 8 didn't fit, so it's somewhere between 6 and 8, which is within the specification. So those valves are within specification. We'll now rotate the engine, like I said, by spinning that back tire. Causes that engine to rotate. And again, we'll just look for the next valve. Looks like it's going to be on number 1 over here. Pointy side up. We'll just repeat the process the whole way through. Now, one thing to keep in mind, I didn't do it on the exhaust, but again, look for the pointy side on the exhaust side and take a measurement at that point there. So that's the easiest way I could tell you to actually check valves. I'm going to go through, check all these, and we'll see if anything needs adjusted. So we checked all valves, and this is what we came up with. Looks like pretty consistent numbers on the intake, as well as the exhaust is almost identical until we got to the, what I call number 1 cylinder. A little bit tight, but nowhere near the tightest setting. So what I figured, a lot of times the manual will tell you to check the valves every 20,000 or so, or 16,000, somewhere between 16 and 20,000 miles. And really, I've never had valves that were out of adjustment at this point. I figured I'd check them because I was in there, but I really didn't think I would need to adjust those valves. I've seen bikes sometimes go as far as 30,000 miles before needing the valves adjusted again. They're pretty well set from the factory, and they don't really change that much, especially on Japanese sport bikes. Really, they kind of stay adjusted for the most part. So check the valves. They look good. I'm actually kind of getting excited now because all we got to do at this point is button everything back up. I got to put the carburetors back together, show you a couple of things on that, but I'm going to put the valve cover back on. We're going to seal that up tight, and then let's just drop the carburetors in and see if she fires up. Now, something I like to do, and this is within recent times of working on stuff, number one, whenever I tighten bolts, I like to torque them. Not necessarily because they need to be torqued, but I torque them down because that way I know they're all tight, and it can go by, and it's a quick way to know that everything's tight and snug. And then once I go through and I torque everything, I then just take a marker and I mark the bolt, and it's nothing crazy, just a little slash mark above the bolt. Now I know that those bolts are torqued, they're set, I don't have to think about it, it's something I can look at before I put stuff together, and I say, okay, I torqued that stuff. But right after I torque stuff, I grab a permanent marker, I mark the bolts, so that way I know I did that, I don't have to second guess it and go around and see if I did that. Alrighty, so to reassemble this carburetor here, again, like I said, I did put a jet kit in this, so I don't really have to take the carburetors apart the whole way, so I'm not really going to show you guys how to install a jet kit in this video per se, but I will go over how to reassemble the bottom portion of this carburetor here. We're going to start with the mixture screw here. Now, common things I see with mixture screws especially is people put these together wrong when they take their carburetors apart. I'm going to show you how to put this together the correct way. It goes mixture screw, then you put on the spring. It doesn't matter which way you put the spring on, it's the same either way. You then grab the washer, it's a little tiny washer, and then you grab the O-ring, and that O-ring is the last thing that goes on. So you have the spring, the washer, and then the O-ring, and that's how it should look before you put that back in the carburetor. Now on this bike here, goes right in here, and you just make sure that all that stuff's in there. You push that in. Now this is one of the most difficult things. People struggle with this very often, so I'm going to try and simplify this the best I can for you guys. All you do is you take and you thread that in the entire way. You just want to thread that mixture screw all the way in until it seats. Now notice I just have fingertips on there. I'm not applying a lot of pressure. It's going to go thread all the way in, and then it's going to gently rest at a stop. Now you saw that the point on that mixture screw is a very fine point, so you don't want to over tighten this because you could break that tip off, and if you do that you're going to have a whole mess of problems on your hand because it is very difficult to get that stuff out of there if it does break. So right there it is seated nice and softly there. Alright, now the way you set this up is, for this jet kit they want this to be 2.5 turns out. So what I do is I mark my screwdriver, I put a little black mark on there. That is the 1 turn indicator, and I'll show you what I mean. So we'll put that in there, make sure we're sitting on the screw head, and again that is butted up against and tight. Then what we'll do is we'll just spin this screwdriver till we see that black line again. That is 1 rotation. Alright, if we spin it this way here, that's a half a rotation. So right now we are at 1.5 rotations on the mixture screw, or 1.5 turns. So if we spin it again and we bring that black line again, that is 2 turns out on the mixture screw. Now with this jet kit it wants it to be a 2.5, so we're at 2 right now. Just going to spin that 1/2 turn till we're on the flat side of that screwdriver there without that black line visible. That is 2.5 turns out on the mixture screw. So very simple. You screw that mixture screw in till it is lightly seated against the carburetor base. Then you want to spin it out. Again, use some type of marking device on your screwdriver and put it on one of the flat sides of the screwdriver. Just turn it out 2.5 turns as per the instruction set, or whatever your instructions say. You should have your mixture screw set up right where it needs to be. So that's how you do that. Hopefully that's nice and simple for you. Right now we are going to install the slow speed jet here. We'll just drop that in there. That's where that goes there, and then we'll just thread that in. Now for this, you just want to, again, you don't go overboard with these. These screws are only brass, so you just want to make sure that they're snug and tight. They're not going to fall out. You don't have to go crazy tightening these down. And then we will just make sure we tighten down the main jet. And again, just snug. We don't have to go crazy tightening that down. Then we will install our float and float needle. Put that back in there. Make sure everything is seated in there and fits nicely. Make sure all that sits in there well. Then we will tighten that bolt down. Again, nothing super duper tight. We don't want to break anything, especially at this point. We're on the last one. We'll then put our float bolt back on. Be nice and set up. Just have to put these carburetors back on the bike, and at this point we're going to see if she runs. Alright guys, so Moto Truth. This is, I haven't done anything. I just put it back together. Figure that way, take it right along with me. I didn't preset this up. We're going to find out at the same time if this thing runs or doesn't run. So I'm going to prime the fuel system a couple times there, make sure that there's nice and full of fuel. And moment of truth, we'll see if she fires up. Oh, thank goodness. It fired up, guys. We got it. So this is great news. It sounds great. It is running on all 4 cylinders. I did not have time to put the levers on. I'll save that for the next video. Now I just have to do the basics like oil change, put some fresh tires on here. But the major hurdle is crossed. The bike starts. We can now fill this tank up with some fresh gas and go out and run it. So first thing I had to do is get it to idle. Now I want to take it out and see if I fixed it and got it to go over 70 miles per hour. But oh, that's awesome. Now I can start ordering some tune-up parts, get the oil change, get all that stuff out of the way. This is awesome. We're gonna go racing. Thank you guys for sticking out the video. If you made it this far, thank you so much for supporting the channel. Again, I'm Matt. This is MotoWoRX. We'll see you in the next video, guys. Fantastic. Awesome.